Hello and welcome to Kantipur Rise and Shine. My name is Pratibha Thuladar. World Press Freedom Day was marked last week. The freedom of the press is a topic that has always been at the center of debate. More so in today's world where the social media's presence is as strong as that of the press itself. American journalist Jill Filipovic has been in Kathmandu holding discussions with various groups about journalism this week. We invited her to our studio today. Jill is a journalist based in Nairobi and New York City, formerly Cosmopolitan.com senior political writer and a columnist for The Guardian. Her work on law, politics, gender, global health and foreign affairs has appeared in the New York Times, The Washington Post, Time Magazine, Al Jazeera America, Foreign Policy, Marie Claire, and others. She is also an editor at NYU's Law Journal of Law and Social Change and a contributor to the Yale Journal of Law and Feminism and the anthology Yes Means Yes, Visions of Female Sexual Power and a World Without Rape, named one of the best books of the year by the Publishers Weekly. She is a recipient of many awards and is currently working on a book about women, politics, and pleasure. Jill fits into post-programming needs by providing practical advice and skills development to emerging women journalists. Her work has often centered on women's rights, reproductive rights, sexual harassment, and cyberbullying. And after that long introduction, I introduce you to the journalist herself. Welcome to our show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here, and I'd like to begin by asking you about your experiences in Kathmandu. You've been here for 2 days, so can you tell us a little about what kind of interactions you've had with journalists here?
Sure. So in 2 very busy days, I've been lucky enough to meet with several journalists in a few newsrooms around Kathmandu, as well as students who are studying journalism and will be the next generation of Nepali journalists. And yesterday I also met with a group of female journalists who are working on making women more common in the media and working together to support each other as women are a minority in Nepali media. And it's been wonderful. Nepal has such a vibrant media community. It's great to see there are so many daily newspapers, weekly newspapers, that radio gets such play here. It's been really fascinating to speak with so many journalists who are doing such incredible work in this country.
You know, we always talk about how the quantity does not really represent the quality of women in journalism. What is your impression of that in Nepal? Did you really feel during your interactions from journalists like women did not have a strong representation despite their figures?
That's what it seemed like. And even the figures here aren't great. They aren't great in the US either. In most places in the world, women are pretty starkly underrepresented in newsrooms. And the group that I spoke with yesterday showed me some statistics that it was something like only 1 in 5 women who are writing for 1 in 5 journalists writing for newspapers here are female. And you know, I've been lucky in my time here to really have had the ability to seek out female journalists and to be set up with conversations with them. And what I've been hearing is that they love their jobs, they're good at their jobs, they take journalism incredibly seriously, they're dogged reporters, but they kind of hit a ceiling in their careers, and there aren't a lot of women who are managers, there aren't a lot of women who are senior editors. They see men get promoted ahead of them, they see men get the political beats and the crime beats and the kind of more serious hard news beats, and then they see their stories relegated to the back pages or the middle pages. And that as hard as they work and as good as they are at their jobs, they're still kind of treated as secondary reporters and as if their work isn't quite as important. That's something that I've heard from female journalists all over the world, and I think it's a real issue in our profession.
And you feel it's not very different in your country?
I think it's a little bit different in the US. I think if you look at the numbers, women are better represented in newspapers, in editorial positions. You know, there's been a female editor-in-chief of the New York Times, although she didn't last very long. It's a little bit better, but it's certainly, we have not achieved parity in the US when it comes to gender representation either. And a lot of the issues are very similar. We would call it the glass ceiling in the US, being able to see how high you can get, but then kind of topping out and not ever reaching the highest positions. That's a really common experience of female journalists. being sexually harassed, whether it's by your coworkers or by sources, or people not taking you seriously, being harassed online, on Twitter, on Facebook, in the comments to your article. These are certainly things that journalists in the US and in Nepal both experience. Numbers-wise, I think the representation here of women in journalism is lower, and it seems like there are more pressures, especially for women after they get married and have kids, to not stay in the industry. So I would say that's a little bit different, but this is certainly an issue facing women in every country I've ever been to.
You worked in different countries. Do you feel like a country's geography or culture has a contribution to make to the growth of women in journalism?
Yes. I mean, I think culture obviously influences everything. And of course, stereotypes about gender and gender roles always influence how much women are able to engage in public discussion, in politics, in journalism, in any other field. So yes, of course, culture is highly influential. That said, I have yet to go anywhere where women are completely equal to men. You know, this is a pressing problem in every country on earth. And, you know, some countries are, I think, better at gender parity than others. But there's unfortunately nowhere on this planet where this conversation isn't still relevant.
How about in Nairobi?
Nairobi is also a challenging place for women. Men, I don't know what the statistics are for newsrooms in Kenya. If I were to wager a guess, I would guess that men probably outnumber women. There are certainly stereotypes in Kenya too about where women are supposed to be, about women in politics. You know, in Kenya, I think an interesting thing is that within sort of the expatriate journalist community, so those of us that are not from Kenya that live there and work, it's a lot of women. And so I think you do see a lot of incredibly adventurous, incredibly curious, incredibly intelligent female journalists moving to places like Kenya, even in places like Syria and very dangerous conflict zones. You have a ton of women working and risking their lives every single day, just like men. But I think those women don't often get the attention or the accolades that they deserve. I think when you turn on a lot of political shows and you hear experts.
So why do you think that happens? Like the moment you talk about, I mean, you know, the moment a group of women journalists gather, I have noticed that we begin to talk about how difficult it is to get where you want to get or to get to your stories, or we end up talking about the glass ceiling. What do you think are the factors that actually, you know, hold women back in this profession?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of them, and it's really complicated. I think one of the biggest ones is that we're so used to seeing men in positions of power and authority. All over the world, for most of modern history, you know, men have occupied the highest levels of political office. They've been the ones in media. They've been the people who we're used to seeing male faces and male voices representing people in charge. And so I think we read in authority and competence and power into male voices. And in a lot of places, including the US, and it seems like including here, for a very long time, women's roles were very domestic, and women weren't really supposed to be in public space, and we weren't supposed to be having opinions and engaged in the political process and engaged in the journalistic process. That's new, and so I think we're still kind of culturally adjusting to seeing women occupying those roles. And I think part of that is that we don't necessarily assume that women are as competent or as powerful or have as much of a right to be doing the work that we do as men. And I think that really undercuts the ability of female journalists to succeed.
Is that what your work is about? You're writing a book, right?
I'm writing a book. That is not what the book is about, but I do write quite a bit about, you know, women in journalism, women in politics, women, you know, attempting to succeed in almost any field that has traditionally been male-dominated.
Tell us a little about your work. You've had this very interesting career. You've written for some of the major media outlets. Tell us about how your growth was in your decade-long experience as a journalist.
Sure. I actually started out as a blogger. I studied journalism at university and then studied law after that and worked as a lawyer. And when I was still in college in, 2003, started a blog about feminism. And wrote about feminism and politics and women's rights. And that was sort of when blogs were very new. And that transitioned into writing more kind of formal op-eds. So then started at The Guardian, ended up quitting my job as a lawyer to go be a weekly columnist there, and then freelanced on the side. Was always, very interested in, obviously American politics are very messy and fascinating, and I liked writing about that, but was also very curious about how women around the world lived. And I've really enjoyed telling women's stories and seeing what are the commonalities, and then how is life here totally different from life, in New York City or in Nairobi or in Stockholm. And so made it a priority in my work to be able to travel and meet women around the world and see what kind of challenges women face. And in telling those stories and having those conversations, thinking about also how can we solve some of these very entrenched and intractable issues, which may be different from country to country, but have a lot of the same underlying causes. So that's really what's sort of motivated my work for the past decade.
And did you find it very difficult to actually grow as a journalist? Like, were there, obstacles from the family or in any other form? I'm asking this question because I think in Nepal, a lot of women find it very difficult to continue as journalists for long because there are a lot of factors that kind of constrain them from working as a journalist. But one of the constraints is also their family, because it is not seen as a profession where women should be working, because it's often not considered very respectable. Right. So any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, my family has been I've been very lucky. My family's been very supportive. I think they would rather have me be a lawyer because it's just a more stable.
What about you? Personally, what do you think you should do?
I think I should be doing exactly what I'm doing.
Okay.
But I think what you're saying is true in a lot of places. It's probably more pronounced here than in the U.S. But there are a lot of stereotypes about how women shouldn't be opinionated, and especially shouldn't have opinions on things like politics.
Or sexuality.
Or sexuality, and certainly shouldn't be talking about that in public. Those can be huge constraints for women, and it's very hard to be the individual person who says, I'm going to fight back on all of this. I'm going to be loud. I'm going to be opinionated. I'm going to be self-confident. I'm going to show up and say, I deserve to be in this room too. That said, that is difficult. That's also a thing that female journalists have been doing for more than a century. Brave, rebellious, radical women for the past 150 years have worked as journalists, often in the face of great adversity. I would like to get to a point where you don't have to be brave and radical to be a female journalist, where you can be just like a male journalist. Some of whom are very brave and radical, and some of whom are just normal people who want to do their jobs. Sure. So I would say to young women here, or even older women here that are interested in this job, it's the best job in the world. You get to talk to people, you get to travel. I mean, hopefully you get to travel. You get to ask very nosy questions that in any other context would probably be totally inappropriate.
It's also a privilege, isn't it? I think the moment a person lets you into his or her life and trusts you with his or her life, it's a privilege, I think, for a journalist.
Oh, it's an incredible privilege. And the degree to which you get to know very quickly other people and their conditions. And I think for me, one of the most fascinating things is how generous people are with their time and with their stories.
Absolutely.
And letting you into their homes. And the number of people that have talked to me about, the worst thing that's ever happened to them in their life, or the most challenging thing, or sometimes the best thing. And given me and my colleagues, and I'm sure you, a glimpse into what their lives are like, it doesn't feel like a job. So for women who are bright and intelligent and curious and interested in the world, I mean, I really can't think of a better thing to do. And I think that our occupation is also worse off when we don't have enough women doing this job, when we're not 50-50 women and men.
And do you think that would impact women's representation, especially in terms of how, we harp on press freedom?
Absolutely. You know, women are more than half of the people on the planet. So we should, of course, be represented equally to men. And part of the job of a journalist is, you know, to be an observer on society, and also to represent society in our writing and to talk about, you know, the challenges and the realities. And I read a statistic before I got here that only 3% of source quotes in Nepali print media are from women. So 97% of quotes are from men. Well, men are not 97% of the world.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if women aren't an equal number of bylines, and if we're not an equal number of sources, journalists just aren't getting the story. We're not getting the full scope of what life is like. And I think that's, you know, that's a real poverty to our profession if we're not able to do that.
Sure. I just talked about that. I just got thinking about how, you know, women are always going to be seen as, or, well, so far, we're always, the moment you're a woman, you're being seen as a woman journalist. Do you think that's even necessary? Like, do you think it might work better if we were just viewed as journalists?
Yes.
Again, being seen as a woman journalist.
Yes, I do think it would be better if we were just viewed as journalists. You know, I would also like to see, you know, hear about a lot about women's issues. And even in my bio, I say I write about women's issues because that's kind of shorthand for, you know, issues like sexual assault, you know, reproductive rights, family, women's rights. You know, but again, women are more than half the population. So those kind of issues affect, well, they first of all do affect everyone. And they second of all affect a majority of people in the world. So it is kind of funny that we segment them off as if they're somehow marginal or special interest, or deserving to be on the, you know, middle and back pages of a newspaper and not the front page when they impact so many people. So yes, I would love to get to a point where women journalists were just journalists and women's issues were just issues.
Women in Nepal, women journalists, I would say, often complain about how they are always confined to beat covering women's issues. And of course, you've written a lot on this also. But sometimes they find it offensive because they feel it's very patronizing, you know, and they're not happy with that. Have you found that the case is similar in other parts of the world, or are women more given like different beats, or how's the situation in the countries where you travel or what?
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty common situation. What's going on in Nepal? It happens in the U.S. too. That, you know, women are traditionally assigned to the style section to write about fashion or entertainment. There's nothing wrong with writing about fashion or entertainment, but sometimes you also want to write about politics or sports or crime or international affairs or economics. I think, you know, in the U.S. it's getting better. You're certainly seeing more and more women writing about these things. But you also see, you know, almost entirely women writing about sort of, you know, on the women's issues beat. And I'm kind of on two minds about this because, you know, of course, I think that you should have greater diversity of bylines. Women should be able to write about whatever they want. I would also like to see the women's issues integrated into political issues, into health issues, into crime issues. I think it's important that women's issues get, what we would call women's issues, get covered and get covered well, and aren't sort of segmented aside. And I think it's important that they're often covered by women. I think it's the perception that those issues are less important, or that they're soft, or that, you know, we're not going to put them on the front page because here's a thing that affects women, as if we're like 2% of the population. So I think you need to combat both. I think you need more women's bylines on a whole breadth of issues, and then we also need to elevate the importance of women's issues in the media generally.
We often see in Nepal that women who work as journalists opt out, become freelance writers, or, I don't know, switch profession. Why do you think is it so difficult for women to remain in the traditional media?
We have a similar issue in the U.S., although again, I think it's probably more pronounced here. And I think it's a couple of things. I think, A, when you don't pay women well enough, you know, women like everyone else need to make money to pay rent and buy food and feed their kids. And so, you know, the salary issues here seem like a really big challenge. You know, I've been hearing that pay is often inconsistent, and that's true for all journalists. but that it seems to be more pronounced for women, and so they sort of get fed up and go somewhere where they're going to get paid better and they're going to get paid more consistently. You know, I also think people, when they work, they like feeling as if their work matters and that it's appreciated and that they're being paid and promoted fairly. And I think a lot of women, after they do this job for a few years, see that their male colleagues are moving up the chain and they get stuck. That's incredibly demoralizing. And then I think the third thing is that so many women have outsized obligations at home. So you get married, you have a child, or you have multiple children, and it's expected that you're going to do all or almost all of the work for that child and for your family and at home. And that's, I mean, that's a job. That's a full-time job with a lot of demands. And so it's putting really impossible expectations on women to be able to shoulder both things. So, you know, I think obviously you need, and this is true everywhere in the world, you need more male participation at home, more participation from husbands when it comes to child rearing, when it comes to cooking and cleaning and doing all the work at the house, so that both partners can also have successful careers outside of the house if that's what they want.
I'll have to cut you there, Jill, because yeah, we've run out of time. Thank you for joining us here today, and it's been wonderful speaking to you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your interactions in Kathmandu and in Janakpur later today. We're speaking with American journalist Jill Filipovic. Thank you for watching.